We get started. All right, we're recording. So, Adam, tell us just a little bit about you to begin with. You've been at UNC Charlotte a few years now. Maybe tell us a little
Mhm.
bit more about your career path up to this point.
Sure. So I've been in Charlotte for about 4 years. Yeah, I moved to Charlotte in 2016 to actually work at the Mint Museum here in Uptown as an assistant curator, and that was the third curatorial position that I've had in museums. And this opportunity came up at UNCC, and I thought it might be nice to take a break from the museum life for a while and maybe kind of catch a different pace. And working with students is always been something that I've really enjoyed. And so I thought it would be a good opportunity to kind of step back into the academic world and help the School of Art and Architecture to host exhibitions and to coordinate programming that would allow students to kind of interact and engage more with contemporary artists, especially working within the region, but also locally here in Charlotte. Um, and this I think this topic is. I've done a lot of thinking about this topic over the years, and certainly in the past few weeks since Suzanne, you and I have started kind of talking about it a little bit. And it kind of made me realize how different a work-life balance can be for creatives, but maybe even more specifically in kind of the field or the path that those creatives are kind of pursuing. And I've worked with a lot of professional artists over my career. I've worked with a lot of teachers and professors and other people within the arts industry, and it seems like there's no, and I guess you could say this for any and all career paths, but there's no kind of like universal equation for balancing what you do as a career and for a living, and then the other side of that, what you're putting that career into as a personal life. um, and I feel that it's going to become an increasingly more important topic, especially for younger people who are looking to start building their careers in any industry, but certainly in the creative industry. And it's going to start to become really important as technology starts to evolve as well. I mean, one thing that I've realized is um, how difficult it is to balance your personal life with your work life, because in your pocket you have a device that holds both of those. I mean, in your contacts, you have both professional contacts, but you have all your personal contacts, and the same in your email. And so it's almost like we've kind of become conditioned to just blur the lines between your working life and your personal life, because you have access to both all the time. And in some situations, depending on where you work and who you work for, you may be required to stay in contact. So you may not have the opportunity to kind of get away from that work life that you want to. And I've had various conversations with some colleagues of mine, and we were talking specifically about this role of technology and how it dictates who we are professionally, and how it can really kind of shape our careers, but also how it um, kind of alters our personal social interactions and the time that we just have for ourselves and our family and our friends outside of work. And we kind of decided that really the closest way you can get to a very distinct work life balance right now is if you have two phones. So you have one for work and then one that's your personal phone. And when it's your time, and when it's the time for you to focus on you and your family and your personal life, then you take that work phone and you hide it or you leave it behind, and that way you don't have any physical access to it. You can't interact over emails, and you can't take phone calls, and you can't send texts. You can't do any of this if you leave it behind. And that was really the only way that we could think of, how could you really balance it in a way that you make time for yourself and you ensure that that time is kind of held sacred because um, we're always wanting to interact, whether it be professionally or personally. And to be honest, I think a lot of the relationships that we all build throughout our lives kind of start as professional relationships. I mean, the people that you work with and the people that you share these goals with and these projects with, those relationships kind of evolve into real friendships. And some of those can be, very meaningful friendships that kind of transfer as you move on in your career. Those relationships can transfer from strictly professional relationships, into you might want to transfer those contacts over to your other phone, so to speak, so that they become kind of part of your personal life. And um, I think that especially in the creative industries, that is the case because I mean, from my personal experience, a lot of my friends and associates right now are people that I, would normally hang out with in a normal situation when I could. Were usually people that worked in other arts organizations or people who worked at the university. And yeah, we would talk about work, but it's because we were so interested in art. And, art is such a broad subject. I mean, it can encompass so much. And so um, we would talk about art and we would talk about creativity. And that, of course, leads to talking about work. And so there was a very kind of blurred line between um, those people that I consider professional contacts and those people who I consider personal friends. Um, and I think that's just how it kind of works out in the creative industry because as a creative, you're so personally vested in what you do for a living. And in many cases, you take what you do from your 9 to 5 and you place it into your personal life and it becomes a part of you. And it's really hard to kind of separate those two. And, for some people, they don't have to. I mean, for some people, I think a work life balance is, or at least people I've met in the creative industry, a balance is that there is no separation, that it's all one kind of holistic kind of entity that doesn't need to balance itself. I mean, it's kind of its own thing. Um, but personally, I think I remember a time when that was the case for me too. But as I get older and I move around and change positions at different institutions and meet new people that I work with and make new friends, maybe around those interactions, I find that I need to kind of create some sort of balance to that. And maybe it's because I feel like I'm at that point of my career that I can start to pick and choose, who I want to be friends with, and who those kind of more professional development contacts I want to keep in order to kind of continue progressing what I want to do in my career. I'm at the point where those contacts are kind of less important to me right now than those who I can really spend quality time with. And if we talk about art and that leads to talking about work, that's fine. But we also have a number of other topics that we can share and talk about. And, some of those might be very kind of personal topics. Um, but I think that when you're first starting out in your career, you kind of want to hold all those close, right? I mean, you want to make sure that you keep all those contacts who would be really great people as references, or might be people that you can go to ask for professional advice, and you kind of roll all of those other people into that contact list of people that you also want to stay in touch with personally, whether it be family or close friends you've had since high school or even earlier. Um, you're kind of developing alongside those people, and then you get to the point where you realize you're kind of developing on your own gradually, and that could be a conscious decision, or it could be a decision that just kind of happens based on your career trajectory. And I'm at the point now where I like to maintain some sort of balance to that. And that primarily means, time for myself, and, time for me and my partner, for she and I to just kind of have some time, because she's in the creative industry too, for us to have some time outside of work, and, time for my 5-year-old daughter, that we can do things together, and it not, be related to what I do for a living, or, going to places, or seeing people who I might work with. Um, and for me, I've discovered that, kind of going back to this idea of how technology really influences that balance, um, I've found that my work life balance becomes a little more pronounced when I focus on analog tasks. So when I can get myself away from a computer screen or my phone and do something very analog, whether it be like, listen to the radio, or listen to a record, or I do a lot of crossword puzzles, just because it's a really great kind of mental exercise. But it's also a puzzle to kind of figure out, but you're actually, using a pencil and writing, and you're kind of away from technology. Um, and I find that a little more stimulating, and it does kind of provide this kind of odd way of balancing my life with my work, and that I get away from it easy when I do tasks like that. Um, and it's not always easy. I mean, it's, like I said before, as a creative, you're kind of personally vested in your work. And, if you're naturally a creative person, then your work in the creative industry is going to feed right into your interests as an individual. Um, and it sometimes can be difficult to kind of pull yourself away from that. And, you know, like I said before, there's no equation for, universal equation for anybody. I mean, I used to keep a studio at my place, and I would, a small corner that I could just go and kind of explore my own creativity with things. But that started to become problematic, because I started realizing that I was either creating things that were derivative from work by artists who I was working with on an exhibition, or I was constantly comparing what I was doing with what artists were doing who I was working with on an exhibition, and I would get frustrated. And so I had to kind of omit that variable out of my balance, my equation, because it wasn't satisfying me on a personal level anymore. It seemed to me more like work, than it was, my time. But some people can really flip that switch easier. I mean, I think a great example are, some of the faculty members we have here at UNCC. I mean, like, part of their life is, I mean, their life is completely surrounded by art and creativity, right? I mean, they, on one side they teach it, they meet with students, they impart their own experience and wisdom on different media, and give professional advice to students. But on the other side, they're in their home studios, and they're working on their own creative projects. And I really envy them that they can kind of flip that switch and have that kind of work life balance. And I'm sure it's not as easy as, it seems from the outside looking in. I mean, I'm sure they still have a lot of, uh, you know, probably time management problems where they have to juggle both. But they still do it. I mean, they're still at home producing their own work while at the same time they're teaching. And I think some people are just like that, especially in the creative world. I mean, I think some people can really kind of resolve that balance a lot easier. And it seems to me like those who can are professional artists who have their own studios at home, who have their own creative pursuits. For me, it's a little more difficult, because I find it more rewarding to use my creative energy to help artists kind of pursue their own vision of an exhibition, or their own vision of a project. I just find that more rewarding to use my creative energy that way than at home in my studio. Um, but it really depends on kind of which area inside this art industry you want to go into. I mean, there are other areas where it's very business oriented. If you wanted to become a gallery owner or work for a commercial gallery, that may completely change how you perceive the art world, and it might make you not want to be a part of it anymore. I've had friends who's experienced that too. And so therefore your personal life is, I mean, it's so easy to separate yourself from that because you want to do something completely different than, being in the business world, even though it still might be within the art industry. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've rambled quite a bit, but I would love to hear any questions that anybody might have.
And again, feel free to put questions in the chat or just turn on your microphone and ask Adam directly.
This is kind of off topic, but your partner, does she also work at UNCC?
No,
Okay.
she works at the Mint Museum.
Oh, nice. Nice.
Adam, a question I get a lot is with creatives, a lot of them have multiple streams of income. They're pursuing all different types of things, and that leads it to them having very little free time. And, they're working on the weekends, they're working late nights, trying to fit in everything. It could be they have a gig over here and a project over here and a commission over here. They might be working a full-time job, a part-time job. So a lot of the students who I talk to, they're struggling with figuring out what's priority. And thinking about even priority as being your own mental health, your healthy body, et cetera, et cetera. But thinking about that, what would you tell students who especially have multiple streams of income or interest in doing multiple things? How would you suggest they think about prioritizing and organizing your time?
That's a really great question. It's a really hard question too. I mean, I think you're exactly right in that, first you have to take care of yourself, right? I mean, burning your candle at multiple ends isn't a good idea, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you just have to do that. Um, and, I think that luckily, artists kind of have this ability that they can, at one time kind of take care of themselves and their own mental health by being in the studio and creating work. So in that way, you're maintaining your studio practice, you're producing works and commissions that you're wanting to sell or you need to have finished by a deadline, but you're also kind of replenishing that kind of mental state that you're maybe not getting when you're working your one or two or even three jobs. Um, and I think what it boils down to is what kind of timeline are you looking at, right? I mean, because there's only so many hours in a day. And so, you have to kind of, in order to have a studio and to maintain a studio practice, you have to have a way to pay for it, right? And so you have to figure out, um, you know, it, I guess a lot of it comes down to budget too. I mean, you kind of have to figure out, what your realm of means are. What can you do to get paid in order to be comfortable? And that it's certainly not going to probably be as much as you'd like, or maybe even as much as you need, but it's as much as you have to have in order to maintain your studio practice. Because ultimately, if that's your goal, right? I mean, that's what your focus needs to be. And I think I've met a lot of artists who also get maybe too engulfed in this idea um, of throwing money into the basket and forgetting that they also need to throw time into that basket to maintain. And then once you're working two or three jobs, and then those three jobs maybe become two jobs, which is better because you've got more time. I mean, ideally. And then what if those two jobs become one job, but then that job kind of creates this career path for you that then you have to choose between, well, should I kind of spend less time in the studio and say it's like real estate? And I follow this kind of path that seems to me a little more comfortable, and certainly will pay better, but it won't allow me to be in the studio as much as I want to be. I mean, I think at that point, that's when you really have to ask yourself, are you willing to be a professional artist? Are you willing to kind of make that sacrifice and, stay on your path to have your own studio and to create work, and to make your statements, without maybe being so comfortable as to having, at least just now, this job that could really kind of cover all of that and allow you to do it, but not give you the time necessary to create those things. And I mean, it's a really tough choice, I think, especially if you're kind of younger and you're getting on that path, which usually that's when this opportunity happens, right? When you're really still trying to like figure out and feel your way along as to who you want to be as a professional. Um, and sometimes your studio practice might not need a lot of overhead. Sometimes, it's not like you're painting, huge paintings or murals, or I mean, some practice can be very manageable in terms of having a smaller space. You don't have to have a lot of equipment. And then sometimes maybe those business opportunities that come by might influence your studio practice, and your studio practice might start to conform to your work schedule. So if you are painting these huge paintings and this kind of job opportunity opens up to you, then maybe that kind of starts transforming your studio practice into creating smaller things. So things that aren't going to take as much time or as much material or as much space. But kind of keeping that going, keeping that kind of ember glowing, so to speak, so that you can, once you have your career path somewhat mapped out, you can always go back to that creative ember and maybe start a new fire in a new studio space at a later year of your life. Um, I don't know. It's really a difficult question, but I think that it really kind of boils down to what type of time do you see yourself having, and if you really, I mean, hopefully by that point you'll have somewhat of an idea of the difficulties you've had in kind of maintaining this career path as a professional artist, and if it's something that you want to continue, knowing that you're going to have to continue to evolve and grow. And eventually, professional artists they do everything themselves. I mean, they create the product, they market it, they work with people to sell it. I mean, I know a lot of artists who their weeks are divided into Monday, Wednesday, Friday is office days, Tuesday, Thursday studio days, creative days. Um, and once you get to that point, then that's your career. But I think it's hard to kind of predict that. I think it's hard to navigate a lot of things in order to get to that point, because there are so many distractions and there are so many things along your way that are going to look so much better than being a struggling artist in your studio and trying to make ends meet. But I think that by that point whether or not being an artist is what you want to do. I mean, even if you went to art school and now you're out on your own trying to figure it out, I mean, I don't think it takes long for you to realize, well, this is something I want to do. This is something I want to maintain. This is part of me. But maybe it's not what that large piece of the pie needs to be in my life to make everything complete. But I still encourage you to keep it. I mean, stay creative, because down the road, there's good opportunity, and there's probably a good chance that you'll come back to that. And a lot of people later in life, suddenly see these things kind of grow, and they go back to them and they work on them some more, and they become even kind of more dedicated to their work than they were when they were first starting out. So,
That's great. Thank you. A couple questions came in, and I think you've touched on this. One question was about how do you keep creative when you have many life roles? I think you've talked about that a little bit, quite a bit actually, because of my question. And then the second question was about artists, and since they're so passionate about what they do, how how do you know when to balance when one ends and another one begins? How do you know for yourself, this is my creative 5 hours, and maybe this evening I'm not going to be as creative. So I guess, how do you separate your time? I think that's what you were saying, Maria. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, so what I was getting at was, let's say, as an artist, I enjoy playing the piano. So how do I know when it's work and when it's just me enjoying playing the piano? I don't know if that like even makes sense.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I guess, I like your example of piano because I mean, I think different art forms require different answers too, right? I mean, being in the studio and having a painting that you've been commissioned to paint, I mean, you have a deadline, so you have to meet that deadline. But in music, that's a completely different animal. I mean, what are you playing, or are you practicing a specific piece that you have to perform? Or are you playing for pleasure? I mean, and in any studio practice, I think, doing it for play and doing it for pleasure is practicing. I mean, going in your studio and having the time to experiment with different materials. Maybe you don't have a specific project in mind or a vision for a piece or even a commission. And the same with a piano. Maybe you're not practicing a specific piece that you have to perform, but you're playing for pleasure, and that's you're practicing in that way. But I don't think that they're I mean, I think the only kind of hard stops to that would be like, okay, I'm going to, practice this piece for so long, and then I'm going to take a break and play whatever I want to play to kind of maybe, I don't know, like let my fingers breathe a little bit, or kind of relax my muscle memory some with my fingers. Um, I don't know if there's kind of a hard stop, or kind of a spot that you can recognize where you're not playing for work and you've started to play for pleasure. And I think also in the creative industry that a lot of artists see both as the same. I mean, you're doing what you love, and even if you're practicing a piece to perform, you love playing the piano. I mean, that's why you're doing it. And so, even if you're doing it for work, so to speak, at the same time, you're kind of doing it for pleasure too, because you are kind of relieving that creative valve in yourself, right? To be creative and to experiment and play. Um, so I think it's harder in the creative industries to kind of acknowledge where that stop is, between work and life. I think it's very gradual, and like I said before, I think that they kind of feed so much into each other, that it's hard to distinguish them apart. And I think that's also why it's so difficult for creatives to have this work life balance, because number one, it's hard to even distinguish what's on this side and what's on this side. And sometimes you don't even get to that point of deciding, well, what do I do to balance them? You're just having trouble trying to separate them at that point. um, and that can be good because like I said, you are doing something that you love. You're playing the piano, or you're painting, or whatever, and that brings pleasure to you. But it's also work, and maybe that is also taking away from time that you could have to yourself in your studio, or at your instrument.
Thank you. Such a great answer to that question. Any other questions? I'm just curious, Adam, do you have any personal goals for yourself? We talked a lot about some of the things you enjoy doing in your spare time. Any new goals for yourself and thinking about the next few years and just making sure you have that time to refresh?
No, I mean, I mean, my current goal, and the goal that I've had now for a few months, is to go see my parents again. But I mean, it's like this is a really timely topic because I mean, especially people working from home so much. I mean, that just muddies the water even more, right? But also, I mean, because we've become, our social lives have become so altered that I think that we also maybe these days focus a little more on our personal lives because of what's missing from it. So not being able to see friends, not being able to see family, not having those physical interactions that we all need as human beings. Um, it's interesting how it seems like a lot of our personal lives has started coming more to the forefront of our minds because our homes are now used as offices and as meeting spaces. And so we want to try to find time for ourselves now. And then once we can't have those physical interactions again, we want to make sure that we have time in our schedule to do that. But it's all right now just so unpredictable that we're not sure when that's going to be able to happen. But until then, I think it's interesting how people, I think, are lingering more on their own personal well-being, whether that be, in the same space as where you're working, or if that's somewhere completely different and away from and in solitude from your work life. So I don't know. I mean, maybe as these circumstances kind of move forward, however they're going to, um, it's created all kinds of different changes now. Maybe one of those changes that'll eventually happen is more clearly defining who we are as our work selves and who we are as our personal selves. It'd be really interesting to see. But yeah, my goals now, I mean, work is what it is, and these days you just kind of roll with the punches, and tomorrow is going to be different than today, and plans are going to be changed, and so you just stay fluid and flexible. So that's allowed me, and it kind of forced me to focus more on my own kind of personal goals in terms of what I changing my diet, or being more active, or going to see my family eventually, and focusing on my daughter. So I mean, it's the kind of unpredictable nature of work right now, um, is kind of, in a weird way, made me more focused on my own personal life a little more.
I know we should have a special segment on life and work balance for creatives during COVID, because it adds a different scenario to the mix. But you're right, and it's definitely changed the way that we even think about leisure, because home has always been my leisure, but now I'm here all the time, so all of a sudden it's not. So
Right.
I'm trying to find other things that I would now call leisure. So it's been very
Yeah.
different. But does anyone else have any questions before we wrap up? Going once, going twice. Well, I just want to thank you all for being here today. Please connect with Adam. He's a wealth of knowledge, especially if you're interested in the world of museums and gallery work. He's a phenomenal expert in that. So I really highly encourage you to reach out and network with him. And also feel free to join us for upcoming career meetups. We have a whole bunch for creatives in our arts, media, and design career community. Feel free to check that out on our website, career.uncc.edu. You're always welcome to meet with me one-on-one if you just want to chat about life and your career. But Adam, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate it.
No, you're welcome. Thank you all for listening. I hope I didn't ramble on too much, but yeah, I mean, what Suzanne said, please reach out to me if you have any questions, especially about, the museum world or the gallery world, or just, questions in general. I'd be happy to answer anything I can.